Good afternoon, pilot teachers, and good afternoon, students.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Sit down. Okay, in our lesson today, we'll basically look at the last lot of activities I'd like us to cover on interpretation and construction of climographs. In our next lesson, we are going to move on then to looking at the content work on climate, and that is when we'll be required to identify the subdivision of major climatic regions and also the different climatic environments. You were given a task to do for your homework, and the task was to complete the construction of the climograph. We started together by looking at steps involved in the construction. Then we did the construction of the line graph. We ran out of time in our last lesson, so you were asked to complete the column graphs for your homework. Before we check on that particular activity and do some more work on interpretation, I'd like us to double check quickly now on the steps that we have looked at for the construction of a climograph. Okay, looking at the steps, important thing that we must have in order for us to do our construction is the climatic figures or statistics. Without those figures, we are not going to be able to do the construction. For the example that we used in our lesson, we looked at a table for country A with information on temperature and precipitation for the 12 months of the year. Okay, from that set of information, we looked at some of the guidelines in the construction of a climograph. Step number one was the planning stage. It was very important that we plan, because if we don't plan well, we might end up making mistakes in our construction. Some of the activities that we needed to do in step one on the planning phase was, we must look at the climatic statistics that are given carefully. Then we must also recognize the figures, especially for temperatures and rainfall, the highest figure and the lowest figure. Once we have studied the climatic statistics or figures carefully, then we'll have to decide how we are going to set out our graph. For the demonstration and explanation yesterday, or in our last lesson, you were asked to construct the graph in your exercise book. So the setting will have to be making sure that our book is in front of us and we are starting from the top to the bottom. So one whole page in the exercise book we needed for our construction. Another important thing about planning our construction is to ensure that we check the amount of space that we have for the construction. If you were asked to construct a climograph on a big chart, say for example, here, you will have to ensure that your planning should be in a way that you are able to use up all the spaces so that the graph can actually be seen easily. If you were told that there will be other information you will be required to put also onto your chart, then you'll have to also plan for how much space will be needed for the other information and how much space is needed for your graph. For our example, we were all asked to actually construct in our exercise book. So one whole page in the exercise book was needed for the construction. Finally, very important is deciding on the vertical scale and also the horizontal scale. Okay, for our activity yesterday, because of the figures that we had, we decided that for our vertical scale, there were two lots of information that we were going to put for our vertical scale. And the first one was for temperature. And from what we decided from the statistics given, we said 1 centimeter was equivalent to 5 degrees Celsius for the temperature. Then we also looked at rainfall to also be plotted on the vertical scale. And we agreed that our scale would be for every 1 centimeter, it will be equivalent to 10 millimeters. So these were part of our planning, and these were the scales that we came up with for our vertical axis. The horizontal scale, we decided that for every 1 centimeter we go across, it will represent 1 month. Okay, having done step one on planning, we moved on then to the construction phase. The framework was important. We used the scale then to rule the horizontal axis so that there are 12 spaces across. The 12 spaces were for the 12 months of the year. After we did the horizontal scale, then we constructed the vertical scale. For the vertical scale, we use those information that we have collected in our planning. One of the important points that I'd like you to also remember is the fact that when we are constructing a climograph, it is not necessary that we have rainfall on one side and temperature on the other side. We can put both rainfall and temperature on one vertical axis, as long as our scale is actually consistent for the rainfall and we have a good scale also for our temperature reading. For the case of our example, we decided that we will put precipitation on the left-hand side and temperature on the right-hand side. Because we needed only one framework for both those information to be placed, it is important we have space also for the line graph beside the column graph. Okay, after the construction of our frame, step number 3, we started off with our plotting. And we decided that we were going to plot the line graph first. In order for you to plot the line graph, it was important that you use the dots. The dots will give you an idea, and not only an idea, but the correct location of the figures for each of the climographs, for each of the temperature readings. Okay, so if you look at our chart here, those red dots, they represented the plotting phase for the temperature reading. There is really no need for you to actually put the circles, but the circles there just to show you that we need to plot those dots accurately. And another important point about plotting the dots is that the dots must be plotted right in the center where the months are placed. Okay, we do not want to place the dot at the vertical axis and at the edge of each of the months where it has been actually constructed. We must place the dots right in the center of the space that we have for the horizontal axis for each month. Okay, after we have checked that we have plotted the 12 dots to show temperature for the year, the next thing that we need to do is to join up the dots. And we must use free hand to join up the dots. Do not get a ruler and start going from this point to that point and a straight line you will get. No. You use your free hand, you join up the lines or join up the dots together to make a line graph. Another point that I also emphasized on, when you come to the edge, do not take from here the line down to 0. Never do that. All you have to do is from the last dot in December, you just extend it to or horizontally across to where the framework is or the end of the frame is. Similarly, for the beginning, do not start from 0 and extend the line all the way to the starting point. All you have to do is from the first month temperature, you extend the line to the framework. Okay, after plotting the dots, the next thing you were asked to complete then for your homework was the column graph. The columns should show us the length of rainfall for each of those months of the year. Having done our scale, we were able to pick up what our columns or how long our columns were supposed to be. But remember, the width of the column must be of the same size. And we decided that all the columns will have a width of 1 centimeter. If you have done all of that, you double check now on the chart. This is what your climograph should actually look like. Okay, we have connected the dots to show temperature reading. We have the columns for the 12 months of the year to show total rainfall. The most important part then of the construction of a climograph is the checking to ensure all information is put and plotted correctly. When we check, double check, does your climograph have a title? What is the title then? What is the title? Frank, what is the title of your climograph?
Country. Country. Country A.
Country A. So the rest of us check, do we have a title, Country A? Okay, maybe we should say climograph for Country A. Okay, so we have a graph for Country A. Good, check to see that you have the title. Check, are all the axes of your graph labeled? Yes, okay, double check. You must have temperature in degrees Celsius on the right-hand side, rainfall in millimeters on the left-hand side, and months of the year at the horizontal axis. And also, if you had plotted accurately, your graph should look like what is shown here on the chart. Could we also add seasons to this particular graph? Yes, we could. Okay, if we were to add the seasons, we must remember there are 4 seasons in a year. There are 12 months, therefore 3 months will be for 1 season. Look at the graph. Which of the graphs are we going to actually look at to tell us the season? The line graph or the column graph? Okay, it's the line graph, okay? So let's see if we can fill in one more set of information for the seasons onto our graph. And you can put the information at the bottom where you have information on months of the year. Okay, tell me. Someone in the class will have to tell us which months then will be winter months according to our line graph that we have constructed. Luisa, could you tell us which months then, according to our line graph, would be the winter months?
November, December, and January.
Okay, November, December, and January. Okay, so here we might put a line through here. So we go winter, and that is November, December, and January. So this is the winter season. Which season follows winter? Dorothy, what is the season that follows winter? Or the season after winter?
Spring.
Okay, spring. From our graph, which months will represent the season spring?
February, March, and
Okay, so we have these 3 months here for spring. Which season follows spring? Francis?
Summer.
Summer. So which months will summer be?
May, June, and July.
Okay, May, June, and July. And finally, the last season then will be autumn. What made it possible for us to be able to identify the seasons? Shelley, what made it possible for us to identify the seasons? So we came up with this information.
The temperature of each month.
Okay, the temperature of each month and also characteristics that we were able to pick up from the different seasons in terms of their temperature. Check your graph. If you had constructed your graph and double check that all of those information are actually plotted accurately, then you have done well with your construction. Anyone with any queries or questions then with the construction of the climograph? Any questions? Okay, no questions. Maybe later on we are going to do a lot more in terms of construction and also interpretation. And having practiced doing some activities on interpretation and the construction in our lesson today, perhaps it will help you with constructing climographs later on if you are asked to do the constructions. Let's move on now to looking at some of the main points that we have already identified from interpretation and construction, and then you will be required to do some activities. We'll start with temperature. Okay, from the climograph, there are two sets of information that are given, temperature and rainfall. For temperature, this is actually shown by the line graph. So the line graph here basically shows us the temperature. The maximum or the highest temperature will be shown by the highest point on the line graph. This point is the highest point. Therefore, this is the point that represents the maximum temperature. Similarly, the minimum or the lowest temperature will actually be shown by the lowest point on the line graph. So the lowest point on the line graph is this point and that point. Two of them are sitting on 8 degrees Celsius. So these are the 2 points that are the lowest point according to our line graph. Temperature range, from what we have calculated in our last lesson, is the difference between the highest and the lowest temperature. So when we find the difference, then what we are finding is the temperature range. The next important feature or information on a climograph is rainfall. And this is actually shown by the column graph. So we have the column graphs here to represent rainfall. The highest precipitation will be shown by the highest column. So if we look at this graph, what is the month that has the highest precipitation? It will be November, because that's the highest column. The lowest precipitation will be shown by the lowest column. So we check the month of July contains the lowest column. Therefore, this is the month with the lowest precipitation. Another important point to do with rainfall, a grouping together of a number of higher columns will show distinctive wet season. So say, for example, these are high rainfalls. If they are grouped together, then we can say that these are the distinctive seasons, or these are the high or the wet season, but it is also distinctive because we have a couple of high column graphs shown together. Similarly, a grouping together of a number of lower columns will show a distinctive dry season. So if we look at June, July, and August, we are grouping together those three low columns. Therefore, we can say these are the months where the rainfall is very low, distinctive dry season. Distinctive wet season, grouping of high column graphs together. Distinctive dry season, grouping of low column graphs together. If a column, or if all columns that are actually shown are very low, it is probably dry all year round. If all columns are quite high, it is probably wet all year round. So let's look at the rainfall here. Is it dry all year round? No, it's not. Is it wet all year round? You think so? According to our graph? No, it's not. There are some months where the rainfall is low, and there are some months where the rainfall is high. So for this particular column graph, we can see that there is a distinctive dry season and a distinctive wet season. At the beginning and ending months, a lot of rainfall. Towards the middle months, the rainfall is low. Another important feature that we can identify from our climograph is looking at seasons. Winter is actually shown by a dip in the temperature during one part of the year. Summer is actually shown by what we call a bump. And the symbol represents that in the temperature during one part of the year. Spring is the season when the temperature line is on its way up. And autumn is the season when the temperature line is on its way down. Let's double check our graph to see whether we are correct. This would be the dips, the lowest point. Therefore, winter. We said spring is the season when the temperature is on its way up. The line graph representing that. And that's correct because you can see there is an increase here. And we said spring, correct. Summer will be the highest point, which is on the line graph a bump, as it is referred to. And then autumn will be when the line graph is on its way down. And that is according to what we have discussed. Okay, having done or having looked at those information, I'd like you now to use the graph you have constructed to answer the following questions. There are 6 questions. You can discuss the questions with the people sitting next to you or the student next to you to come up with your answers and have your answers written in your exercise book. Note of, so I hope you have already copied down those questions. Okay, good. And the next 3 questions. Okay, we're going to correct now those 6 activities. Okay, correct the 6 activities. Question number 1 from the monitor. What is the maximum temperature recording? Everyone should be checking your graph, the maximum, this point here. And also from the table, you remember the table that you used for the construction? By looking at the table, you didn't need to actually work out by trying to rule across and then check. You can just use the table to actually come up with your answer. And the answer should be 25 degrees Celsius. If you were not given the table, then you need to actually rule an imaginary line to where the scale for the temperature is for you to find out from the line graph what the maximum temperature would be. Okay, the maximum or the highest, that is another term we use for maximum temperature. So 25 is the answer for question number 1, or A. Let's look at B. How many months is the temperature above 20 degrees Celsius? So 20 degrees Celsius here, to find our answer, we can actually rule a line, imaginary line again, right across, and any months that are above it will be months that have temperatures over 20 degrees Celsius. Let's check. If this is 20, we had a line placed across 20, then it would have to be 4 months of the year. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? So 4 is the answer for question number 2, or B. Let's look at C. What is the temperature range? To find the temperature range, we find the highest temperature, and we already know it is 25. The lowest temperature is 8. We subtract the lowest from the highest, and we come up with 17 degrees Celsius as our answer for C. So 17 degrees Celsius, the answer for question C. Let's move on to D. During what season does most rain fall? The highest rainfall is in this particular month. And in what season would it be? The answer will be in winter. In winter, that is when most of the rain falls for this particular graph. Okay, the highest rainfall is here. That's when the temperatures are actually decreasing or at the lowest. So it is the winter months. Answer for question D is winter. The next question. How many months of the year is rainfall below 50 millimeters? We do the same thing like what we did for temperatures. This time we find 50 millimeters. We put a ruler across and we find out how many months is rainfall below 50. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Oh, sorry, this one should be 50, 50 millimeters. So the question is asking for how many months of the year is rainfall below 50. So therefore, it will have to be 5 months. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 months of the year where rainfall is below 50. If the question asks how many months of the year is rainfall 50 and below, then we will include 50 millimeters. But because we are asking for below 50, it will have to be 5 months of the year. Okay, finally, is this place in the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere? And our answer will have to be in the northern hemisphere because there is a bump in the temperature in the middle months. And we know that in the northern hemisphere, in the middle months, that's when they have their summer. And that's where the temperatures will be the highest. Okay, if you can make your corrections, and that will also bring us to the end of our lesson. Class, if you could stand up now, please. To the pilot teachers, our keyword for lesson 125 is line graph. Good afternoon and thank you, students.